Okay, here we go. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Network Innovation event. My name is Owen Tunstead and I work with our Public Service Innovation team in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. You're all very welcome and thank you very much for taking time out of your very busy schedules to join us today. The network is a space for public servants to convene, learn and share around the central theme of innovation in the public sector. However, this space is very much yours. Like today's guests, if you or your organisation have an innovative project or initiative that you're working on, we'd be delighted to provide you with this platform to share and inspire thousands of like-minded public servants just like you. Today, we're focusing squarely on exemplary, practical initiatives capable of being emulated in other public sector bodies. To do so, we welcome two enthusiasts at the forefront of their organisation's innovation journeys. First up, we have Catherine Kelly. Catherine is a Senior Executive Officer in Corporate Affairs and International Relations Directorate, if I have that right, Catherine, of Cork City Council. From developing an innovation strategy to establishing an internal network to sharing learnings, Catherine will be presenting on Cork City Council's all-encompassing approach to embedding innovation in their organisation. Second up, we welcome Bridgett Estridge to the panel. Bridgett works on the Engagement and Innovation team in the Department of Social Protection. Bridgett will discuss how the E&I team serves as a forum for transformational change in the organisation and some of the practicalities on how this actually works. Just a little housekeeping before we start, guys. The event is being recorded and being made available for viewing afterwards. However, only the panellists will be viewable. So we encourage you all to get involved in the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. To do so, simply send your questions or comments via the Q&A function at the bottom right of your screens. We'll try and get around to as many questions and comments at the end in the Q&A section. So without further ado, let's get started. Catherine, we're going to roll over to you and the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Owen, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen there now. Just let me know, Owen, if you can see that. Can you see that all?
Not yet, Catherine. I'm going to go again. I have it on file anyway if we need to, no problem. Yeah, it's working now, Catherine. And yeah, perfect. Just fly into, yeah, perfect.
And I'd like to tell you a little bit about our innovation journey. Starting with the corporate plan that we prepared back in 2019, which feels like a very long time ago now. But we did a session of workshops and we engaged with staff and we developed 6 corporate values, and one of those values is innovation. And along with that, we've noticed that there's an awful lot of work happening nationally with Owen and Jane and the team in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. And I'll be speaking to that a little bit in terms of the context of what we've been doing in Cork. So we'll just move on. So the Our Public Service initiative, previously known as OPS 2020, delivering today and shaping tomorrow. We looked at this in the context of what is innovation, and it says it's the creation of a new viable offering that adds value, and the vision is harnessing the power of innovation to deliver world-class public services in Ireland. So we put together a forum in Cork City Council. We brought some staff together to do a little bit of brainstorming around this for us. The forum meets on a monthly basis and it's a cross-representation of staff from a number of our directorates. We would have in and around over 1,500 members of staff in Cork City Council. That would have increased there recently. We'll have heard of the bound extension in 2019. So we pose the question, what is innovation? What comes to mind when you think of the word innovation? We got some very interesting feedback on that, from having a different perspective to looking at best practice, new ways of doing things. I like this one, taking a chance, which is very interesting in the context of we're working in a public sector that has a lot of watchdogs. We've often said, you know, you can learn a lot from what doesn't work as much as what does. Adding value, looking at things from a new angle. And I like this one as well, future-proofing and sustainability, you know, moving forward in terms of how we approach things. So this is very useful insight to some of the work that we were putting together for the innovation strategy. And just to give a shout out to the deeper team, the online tools I would encourage that you would use, we took this one, the Innovation Snapshot. This is really a SWOT analysis, and we asked a few questions around this. I should say, when we were meeting with the Innovation Forum, obviously because of the COVID pandemic, we had to do that online. But the tools are very useful in terms of Miro and the whiteboard sessions, because it gets great interaction among staff and a bit of collaboration going. So, you know, innovation initiatives mentioned were developing the Innovation Week. We hold a local Innovation Week during the national one every year. We showcase some projects during that. We do awareness sessions around the Public Service Innovation Fund. We've been very successful with that, thankfully, over the last couple of years. And, you know, the strengths and weaknesses coming out of this process give very useful feedback in terms of a can-do attitude among staff, which is great to see. There's a wide range of skill sets in a lot of our organisations. They can be very large sizes in local authorities and across the public sector generally. And hearing things like it's a strong and vibrant staff population, a senior management team that's open to new ideas, I particularly like the strength here for love of the city, and so on. But like any organisation, we also have our challenges. And the group came back with some feedback here in terms of if we have a very hierarchical approach, you know, can it exclude some from contributing? The silo mentality is something that we've all come across and continue to come across as a challenge. And, you know, in terms of, you know, for too grade orientated, innovation and innovative approaches belong to everybody. So how do you get that across and encourage it in terms of job cultures, in terms of trying to get over that cumbersome size if the organisation is very large? So we also asked about barriers to innovation and enablers, because your opportunities can come from weaknesses that are identified. So confidence of staff here was interesting to see in terms of speaking up, putting ideas forward. The day-to-day job can be incredibly busy in any area. And if you have an idea, where do you get the space to think that through, and where do you bring it, and how do you encourage it to happen? Here's one that came back around on the job or sit by Nelly style training, which came back in some of these feedbacks that we are in a sector that relies on a status quo because we know something has worked, that we continue to deliver it in the same ways. And when a new staff member takes over, they're trained in the old way. But it's seeing how you can develop that, continuously service improve, where you can cut out duplication, where you can streamline service in terms of having that enablement culture. And the enablers here would be around cooperation between directorates, developing a risk appetite, more engagement and inclusion, and innovative leadership, which belongs to everyone in terms of those enablers. So we put this together for the innovation strategy in an appendix in terms of showing the storyboards that came back to develop what these strengths and weaknesses and enablers were. And what we saw here was the IT possibilities as well that came out strongly to inform our strategy. And, you know, things like our ability to work with communities. We did some stakeholder mapping, which I'll show you there in a minute. But other things like continuous professional development training came up, you know, the on-the-job learning, how we can develop staff, how do you overcome resistance to change and engage with line managers and teams, and not being afraid to bring those ideas forward. So that's a nice way of presenting it on the storyboard. So we find that pictures tell engage with line managers of feedback. So forward thinking, giving things a go, generating lots of ideas in a growing city, and developing that positive culture is what we put together. But we also had the hurdles around the lack of confidence. So you see some commonalities here in terms of silo thinking. Where do I bring my idea? Maybe this is not my job, and having a lack of confidence. There's kind of a common theme coming through where we were finding the hurdles in terms of trying something out. And that innovation, which is very important, is not all about technology. It can be, because IT is a huge enabler, but not necessarily the only thing that can be innovative. And, you know, this being risk averse, maybe we're working in an operating environment that does value what the tried and trusted, and then that can be linked to the opposition to change as well. So we asked our Innovation Forum to fill out the Innovation Scorecard, another very useful tool. And I believe Jade and the team will be looking at developing one that can give aggregate data. So myself and the BPSI team, that's our Business Process Service Improvement team, who've done a lot of work on this in corporate affairs, filled one out ourselves in terms of how we viewed innovation in our organisation, Cork City Council. And we also asked the Innovation Forum members to fill this tool out in terms of their perspectives. And the results were quite interesting in terms of what came back to us. So across the rating on key areas, and I won't go through it in huge detail, but we scored quite high in collaboration and strategic intelligence. And again, it shows where we need to develop on our weaknesses. But, you know, in terms of the leadership and planning, that would have asked questions of, does your organization value innovation? Does it have a strategic objectives around it? You know, when we look at our corporate plan, we see we do have it as a corporate value, as I mentioned. We look at research, developing and innovating under a city that's driving economic and sustainable development. That's in there as a strategic objective. So it is reflected. But then it comes to, okay, if we have this in our strategies, are we delivering it on the ground? And how's the culture around this, which asks questions, you know, of where people can put ideas to put forward? Do we share the knowledge? Do we do the networking? Do we delegate and influence the design of processes? Where we scored lower then in terms of this tool, we put the data together, was around intellectual property. Now, I think we scored low on this because the suspicion is that maybe people or staff don't really know what that is. You know, have we ever dived into it in terms of when you develop it, who owns it? If you're tendering or procuring on particular systems or projects, who owns the intellectual property after us? How can you share that? And is there anything here that you need to look at around trademarks or branding and so on? And whether or not organizations have intellectual property policies. So that was very informative in terms of some work we may be looking at. But one that I often think of, I have a lot of years background in local government myself, and you know, I can empathise having worked in different areas, including housing, how we can be very taken up in what we need to deliver in terms of service delivery on a day-to-day basis. Do we get time to evaluate and improve by looking back? And this is crucial really to see what worked and what didn't work, as I mentioned earlier, and sharing those learned experiences. And it's almost like taking the reflection piece out of the job. You know, do you give yourself an afternoon or Friday to look back on the week and say, you know, when you were looking at different work programs, what worked, what didn't work, what you can learn from it, what you can share with others. And this scored at 50%. And I think it's a very important one, particularly when we have such a pace of working and such accountability, that we get that chance to look at what worked in terms of driving improvements for future projects. So I mentioned stakeholder mapping earlier on, and in everything you do, you'd identify stakeholders. So we asked the group to look at any particular work area or project that they were doing to see, you know, who participates in the project and who is interested in it and affected by it. This scale is on low to high in terms of power and low to high in terms of impact. And, you know, it's very useful to see the amount of stakeholders that a local authority can have. Obviously, a key stakeholder we have is our general public. But also there would be interest groups, there's the media and the influence the media can play. There are lobby groups, there are our own council committees, as well as the other PPN and community groups and bodies and NGOs that are out there. So it's a very useful way to track, you know, communication channels and how we get people on board, develop ownership around whatever project that you'll be looking at or service delivery area that you're improving or starting out on. So what we did after stakeholder mapping, which, as I say, gives a visual process of laying out all the stakeholders. We looked at the priority areas. We mirrored these in the local strategy from the national Making Innovation Real strategy that was launched by Minister McGrath there around key priority areas. So putting citizens and users at the centre of innovation to enhance their experience through seamless service delivery. So we asked the group to look at that in the context of SMART in terms of what's specific, measurable, actionable, and where we generate results, and how that inform actions in the strategy. And I should say here that we were looking at the templates for the innovation strategy, and that had come from deeper to look at this. So we used whiteboard sessions again with the group that were interactive to take a look at citizen-centric innovation. And one of our corporate values I mentioned earlier in terms of citizen-centric, we have people-centric as one of those values, as well as public good, trust and integrity and respect and so on, as well as innovation. So this is around listening and engaging with citizens and users traditionally we may see ourselves sometimes in organizations as inward, outward thinking. We know best, we know a lot of what we've done already. And while all that's true, it's very important to collaborate and hear from your end users. That's what service design is all about as well when you're looking to improve areas. Often think community workshops or focus groups can be used here, but it's tailoring that engagement to the audience to encourage their participation. And there are an awful lot of forums that can do that today through the PPN. But what came out strongly as well was engaging with young people, schools, children, Corlin and Oak, and a recent project that's commenced here called Young Social Innovators. IT tools were mentioned as a strength earlier on. So promotion of online consultations and social media platforms can play a key role in engaging with citizens as well in terms of their feedback. So we looked at the website in terms of designing and delivering integrated and easy to use services in terms of user experiences. How user friendly is our website? In terms of streamlining services for consistency. In terms of whatever platforms that they're delivered on. So the next one we took a look at with the group was creating a culture where all staff are inspired, empowered and enabled to innovate. A very ambitious statement. And what came across here, back to what we were saying earlier on in terms of, the silo mentality, what can be very challenging. How do you get cross-director collaboration and engagement? How if I'm working in a section of housing, there's colleagues of mine working in operations area where there's traffic management. We belong to the one organization, so where do we kind of came out of that with creating a forum for asking for help and sharing those ideas and inputs and creating that networking space, that space where staff can come together. And the innovation forum is an approach to achieving that. We also have a very strong intranet developed here in terms of using the SharePoint, which has been a great enablement to put up news events. We put this news event up there this morning, and doing a microsite has come out of this for innovation, where we might do project updates on SharePoint. So as well as that, then training and development of staff that came across is very, very important in terms of not just a training piece, but on the job learning, what I learn on the job, what I can share with others. And it's interesting how the COVID pandemic itself created an external catalyst, if you like, for different ways of doing work, including remote working, but also the online tools in terms of lunchtime learning and lectures we found very useful. We would have done a lot of awareness sessions, for example, on the Public Service Innovation Fund, and we did see a very strong appetite. We had 9 applications in 1 year to that fund from Cork City Council and 6 the following year. And we were delighted to have been successful with 2 projects in 1 year and 1 this year in 2022. And then sharing the experiences around that with the staff internally through promotion of innovation forum participation. And we're also looking to bring in some guest lecturers externally and internally. So just to say thanks to Chris Kiernan, who attended our last session to talk to the staff about some of the initiatives that are happening nationally and sharing some experiences there. We would have had Elaine Burkett, who's an Innovation Change Manager from the HSE, address staff as well. And we do these sessions during Innovation Week locally when we hold it in November every year. We've also looked out to see what kind of courses are available with our stakeholders in education. And the NTU here in Cork, we have 5 staff now enrolled on Designing Innovative Services course there. We also have 2 staff doing Innovation Leadership course with Trinity in Dublin. And of course, there are lots more there through the IPA and Springboard. So this CPD element, for staff came across very strongly in this consultation that we did with the forum. But also, if you're doing a course, it's nice to come back and tell everybody how you're getting on, what you're learning, what you can bring into the job in terms of applying some of those theories. So priority 3 then around culture and innovation looked at working across sectors and organisations to optimise efficiency by scaling innovation across the Irish public service. So we can all be guilty of looking internally maybe in terms of delivery of work programmes, the day-to-day, what's being expected, but this is what Deeper is all about actually, which is why this innovation rep forum is so fantastic. We also have the LGMA in the local government sector that bring a group of people together. Eddie O'Loughlin would have done a lot of work on that too. And this is where we share our experiences as a public sector. you know, and look out and get ideas and see how we can apply them back locally. So those promotion of initiatives, shared learnings, can help increase that collaboration. So, you know, I mentioned cross-director collaboration within the council, but this is, I suppose, across the public sector in terms of organisations sharing ideas in terms of what worked, what didn't work, and how we can look to build on what has been successful. So we have recently launched a corporate resource library on an internal intranet where, you know, for example, presentations such as this can be uploaded. It's great that these things are also being recorded. But the earlier example of where do I bring my idea if I want to kind of explore it further, you know, things like mentoring have come back as part of this consultation, a think tank group, blogs on internet sites with inputs from all staff, and this microsite that we're seeking to develop at the moment. So as a result of this feedback, we have asked, you know, the staff on the forum to bring this up at staff meetings, to chat about it. Storytelling, we have found, is very, very important in terms of sharing the project ideas, project updates. So this is about making innovation real in Cork City Council through the development of staff members, through sharing back ideas from continuous learning, looking at the development of technologies through SharePoint, and increasing that collaboration piece. And I just have to say the toolkits that were available from Deeper on this were very, very useful for those interactive board sessions in terms of engaging with the staff here. So I'm delighted, just going to end the slideshow there. Out of it.
Perfect, that's fine,
yeah.
Catherine.
Yeah, so if there's any questions at the end, I'd be happy to talk them through the group. I suppose, as I mentioned, the forum meets monthly, and we look to set aside the last Friday of every month for staff to come together. And a forum is a larger body of people than a focus group, which is usually in around 8 or 9. Our forum would have been around 20 attending at the moment. So just finally, we presented this to our senior management team yesterday morning in terms of the innovation strategy, which they've just approved for Cork City Council. So that brings my presentation to close. I probably went on a bit longer, but if you have any questions, just let me know.
No, thank you. That's perfect. Thank you very much for that, Catherine. It's fantastic to see public bodies lead, kind of implement making innovation real strategy in such an exemplary way. Obviously, your presentation shows just how wide kind of the approach has to be to kind of implement it and embed it correctly, stakeholder engagement, and even going even further, kind of having your own internal network that probably is a space specific, whether it's just for Cork City Council workers, whether it is for local government workers. It's very, because obviously we have a broad network of all public sectors, so it's great to see public bodies take it upon themselves to have something specific that will cater for the needs and worries, and kind of to help them through change management within their own sector, as opposed to kind of falling within a broader umbrella. So thank you very much for that. There are already questions coming in, so I'm going to save them for the end. Catherine, you're going to have to ready yourself for a few questions. And without further ado, we're going to hand over straight away to Bridgett from the E&I team, the Engagement Innovation team at the Department of Social Protection. So Bridgett, I'm going to give you presenter rights now. And
sure.
Perfect. When you're ready, Bridgett.
Okay, can you see that there?
Yeah, it's coming up now. And yeah, far away.
Okay, lovely. Thanks a million for having us. Thanks to the team for having us today, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bridgett Estridge, and I manage the Engagement and Innovation Programme here in the Department of Social Protection. Today, I am delighted to have the opportunity to share with you what our E&I programme is about, how it works, and maybe even encourage or inspire other organisations to maybe adopt a similar approach, albeit in maybe a more scaled down way. So what is engagement and innovation? I'll refer to it as E&I from now on, just so you know what I'm talking about. We launched the E&I programme in DSP in 2013, and this replaced the partnership model of engagement between management, staff and unions. This programme, it's a way of exploring and agreeing change in a proactive and open forum of equals. We aim to encourage, to foster and support as many staff as possible to think creatively, put forward ideas and get involved in our initiatives and projects. We've had over 170 projects completed to date, and these projects are designed to bring about improvements and innovations to the way our business is completed, and also to improve the experiences for our staff at work. The E&I programme is primarily project-based. It's overseen and supported by senior management at the highest level. And that's a really key component of the success of the programme, is management buy-in. It's really essential in terms of ensuring that, say, sufficient resources are available. This enables then the engagement and innovation activities to be achieved and then sustained. And this also includes the agreement and implementation of any proposed changes where those changes are appropriate. Senior management involvement also means that the programme continues to be widely recognised by staff, and it's constantly driven forward. And it also means then the department is continuously innovating, moving with the times and changing for the better. So before I get into the nuts and bolts of how the programme works, I just want to talk a little bit about why we innovate in the first place. Obviously, as public servants, we're always under scrutiny when it comes to our allocation of resources. So it's really important that we're seen to strive to be ahead of the curve and to get the best value for money wherever possible. And then there's also an expectation of us to provide the best possible service for our customers. And that means constantly looking for ways to improve and adapt to the changing times. And then also we must remember the importance of supporting our staff and ensuring the best work environment possible. Another great outcome of the programme is the opportunity that it presents to staff to develop themselves. So our groups provide really excellent means of networking and collaborative working, which is something that our staff may not have the chance to do in their everyday roles. The way we innovate using the E&I programme is, first we consider what it is we want, using a kind of blue sky thinking. That's a real buzz phrase, which basically means that if we had a magic wand, what would we do? Then we consider these ideas in terms of what is reasonable. So for instance, we might absolutely love to have a masseuse on staff or a barista in the office, but clearly those things wouldn't be reasonable, so therefore they're not viable. So once we decide then what is reasonable, then we look at what's possible. So we ask questions like, do we have the technology? Is the change supported by legislation? Is it safe? Once we find the solution or solutions we hope for that are both reasonable and possible, and then we have the opportunity to innovate. We can consider innovation in 3 stages: the challenge, the solution, and the implementation. Identifying the initial challenge is the stage where the idea comes to us for discussion. Once that's identified as a reasonable and possible idea, then it can move on to being a project. During the term of that project, that's where the ideas and solutions are generated. And then finally, that project produces a set of recommendations or best fit solutions. And these are then passed on to the relevant business area for implementation. I'd probably personally add a 4th stage here, which is a review stage, because I think it's really important to wait a period of time after a change has been implemented and then sit back, evaluate, take stock of the success or otherwise of that change, and then that enables us to learn. Success in innovation, it involves creative problem solving, the problem of which is the practical application. And without that practical solution, there is no innovation. We're basically just dreaming. The process may be cyclical, as you can see there in the slide, so an ongoing process, and a solution may not be our forever solution. We might be continually testing ideas and changing. And we are firmly of the belief that using critical thinking combined with an open mind ensures that we will always apply our best available solution. So here you can see the structure of our programme. We use the term leadership team in the titles of all our groups, and they exist at 3 distinct levels: strategic, higher and project level. The programme is overseen by the strategic leadership team, which is chaired by the Secretary General. Then we have 5 higher leadership teams, each chaired by assistant secretaries, and they cover support functions, regional operations, centralised schemes, digital services and policy areas. Each of these 5 higher leadership teams are responsible for several E&I project leadership teams. So they're the project groups themselves at any given time. And at the moment, we have 19 active project teams. To explain the structure just a little bit further, the role of our strategic leadership team is to provide strategic leadership and direction to the overall E&I programme. In this role, they influence, monitor and support a collaborative approach to work. They have an oversight and evaluation role to ensure that the engagement process actually adds value to the business of the department, and it ensures then that all staff are supported and empowered in the work of their groups. And then they also take into account and benchmark against our 5 core values. Our 5 higher leadership teams then, they also hold an oversight role, and they're the ones responsible for identifying and approving new project ideas relating to their respective areas of responsibility. They also regularly monitor the progress of the project teams, they drive projects to completion, and they ensure that recommendations arising from project reports are considered and implemented in the relevant business areas as appropriate. It's at this stage then that any industrial relations concerns over any of the issues under consideration, they may be referred to appropriate IR processes. But it's important to note at this stage that E&I is in no way to be confused with regular IR processes, despite the heavy union involvement. They remain completely separate, but there might actually be times on a group where a group uncovers specific IR concerns, and if it can't be teased out within the project group itself, then it's referred on through regular IR channels. It's kind of hoped that the process itself and the union input at all stages ensures that any potential IR matters are well ironed out and agreed upon before a project team makes their recommendations in their final report. Then our project leadership teams are the on-the-ground groups who are currently out there researching ideas and innovations, and they will each produce a final report and recommendations on their particular subject. Those recommendations should be solution focused and designed to help the way that we work together. As I mentioned earlier, we have 19 active groups taking place at the time, with members of all grades and locations voluntarily taking part. We've had up to 30 projects on the go at any one time at national, regional and local level. I'll speak a little bit more about the work of the teams a little later. Then lastly, we have our co-option committee. This committee is made up of 5 members. So we have a HR manager, an E&I coordinator, and then representatives for Forza clerical grades, Forza executive grades, and 1 AHCPS rep. This committee works jointly to appoint members to all of the leadership teams from top to bottom, and this happens through an expression of interest process. When they are choosing membership for the groups, they follow a set of guidelines, and this ensures absolute fairness. They take into account a number of factors when choosing members, and that includes grade spread, gender balance, geographical location, experience and expertise, and also interest in the subject. The whole E&I programme runs under a number of key principles, and these are full engagement with the process, equality of all participants. So we advise people from the beginning of all our groups that you leave your grade hat at the door. All the opinions and views and contributions of every group member are to be taken into account and treated equally. Mutual respect and courtesy and openness. So some of our projects deal with sensitive and emotive issues. So for example, at the moment, we have a current project looking at supports for staff and customers who have suffered a bereavement. So on those groups, it's really important that people are allowed to be open. Balanced representation, as I mentioned, our co-option committee ensures that all grades are represented and there's a healthy balance. A rotation of our committees, the strategic and higher leadership teams have a 3-year tenure. Prioritisation of issues. So for example, here, when the pandemic hit, we moved quickly to set up new project groups, researching the pressing issues at the time. So for instance, the impact of remote working, the digitisation of certain functions, the availability of self-service stations and intro centres, that kind of thing. And then we have delivery and commitments and our consensus decision making. So again, we're always stressing that everyone on our project teams are to be given an equal voice, and all decisions made in terms of recommendations are agreed by all participants. How our project leadership teams are formed. These teams are formed to look at project suggestions, and ideas can come from staff directly through the E&I unit or through their manager. They can come from management themselves, where they might identify a gap in services or a particular business need in their area. They can come from the members of our higher or strategic leadership teams. They can come from our union reps, and actually we get quite a lot of ideas from our union reps around the time of their national committees and AGMs. We also have a dedicated section on our SharePoint page where people can submit their individual ideas. So basically we'll take ideas from anywhere and everywhere, and all ideas are given due consideration. The PLTs then are formed through an expression of interest process on our SharePoint site. All of our groups are voluntary, and actually we don't even take nominations from managers for group participants. So this just always ensures that anyone who's on a group actually wants to be there. They've got a genuine interest, and that means that they bring the most passion and commitment to the projects themselves. The membership then is chosen by our committee. We put around 15 per group. We did used to allow for bigger numbers on our groups, but through experience, we've realised that in order for groups to run as efficiently as possible, 15 seems to be around the optimum number. I mentioned before there's balance of grade, gender, location, experience and interest. And we actually also keep a database of people who have previously applied for groups but haven't been successful. So the committee try their best to ensure that anyone who's ever expressed an interest in innovation, they do get a chance to participate, albeit maybe not necessarily in the first group that they express their interest for. And then all of our groups include representation from staff, management and unions. So on the groups themselves, the role of the group is to explore input and ideas from staff, to focus on efficiencies and innovations in areas such as business and staffing, and this can be at divisional, sectional or local level. The chair for the groups is usually canvassed for and nominated by one of the higher leadership teams. We've recently found that having the chair come from the business area that eventually will own the recommendations works best. And this kind of just ensures that any potential barriers or issues are identified at project stage. A chair can be of any grade. We have chairs at CO and EO level, and we've chairs at PO level. The group will then agree the terms of reference from the outset, and then they commence their work. They meet several times over 4 to 6 months, and since COVID that's all been online, which actually works really well because it just allows for staff from across the country to collaborate without the worry of having to get to a central location for a meeting. The work of the PLT can include discussions between members. They are free to conduct research, surveys, they can enlist outside expert guidance, they can go on site visits. But basically, once a group is formed and we provide the guidance on the process, then the E&I unit steps back and the groups are free to conduct their work as they see fit. All group members have an equal voice, as I mentioned before. Presentations. This is brought to the HLT or the SLT for presentation, discussion and sign off. And then this report is handed to the business area owner and published on an our internal store page for all staff to access. And then the business owner will implement the recommendations where appropriate. So progress then is reviewed at a later stage. We've kind of been reviewing progress informally up to this point, but at the moment we're building a review tracking system where recommendations can be uploaded, assigned to a business area and tracked for a period of time. And then after that we can report on what has been implemented or not, and then if not, why not. Can I just stop for 1 second because my laptop is telling me that the battery is going to go. I'm very sorry.
No problem. Take your time, Bridgett. No problem.
Yes. No, you're grand. Sorry, I didn't see the switch on the wall wasn't on. Rookie mistake. Yeah, so look, it sounds like work, and where's the payoff? How do we encourage people to join our groups? We do understand that everybody is super busy with their day-to-day work and that their time is precious. So why should they volunteer to participate in a project? So we believe that this is a real opportunity to improve the department for staff and customers. The E&I projects have brought about some of the most exciting changes to the way we work in DSP since 2013. And those ideas came from within the department, from people who really wanted the opportunity to have their voices heard. In terms of personal development, we believe that partaking in our projects allows staff to build their network, to work with people from all over the country of all grades, all work backgrounds. They can learn from each other's experiences. They can pass on their own valuable experience and knowledge. And then when it comes to their career development, being involved in or even chairing a group from start to finish can actually make for really excellent interview competency examples. So we've had people use E&I as an example of teamwork, communication, influencing skills, delivery and results. There's some great examples there. And then finally, we really think that this is a great way of making a difference. We say to people that, look, have you ever sat at your desk and thought there's just a much better way of doing this when you think about your own work or the work of the department? And submitting an idea for a project is an excellent way of actually influencing real and tangible change and becoming part of the evolution of the department. A lot of our projects through the years, or most of them through the years, have originated from staff members who were inspired to make a difference. These are just a few examples of our previous projects. Some projects have national implications and some are more local and focus on solving the day-to-day issues which arise for staff. The ones I have up here are generally more national, but there can be local projects talking about, you know, canteen issues or parking issues. So it can go down to that base level, or you can have something that's national. We have there our planning for retirement guide. An E&I team looked at that subject and they produced a document which is now given to all staff approaching retirement. Our wellbeing project, under our commitment to develop the overarching health and wellbeing framework under our people strategy, we set up an E&I team exploring staff wellness. This group then recommended the establishment of a dedicated wellbeing unit and drafted what is now the DSP staff and the health and wellbeing policy. That unit now holds regular initiatives, they hold webinars, they've got a dedicated intranet page and a monthly newsletter, and they actually now have a network of voluntary wellbeing champions around the country. So that would be one of our big success stories with E&I. You can see our employment status information there. That would be more one of our technical projects. So we would have a lot of projects related to our particular schemes that we run. So it could be to do with the awarding of credits, anything to do with our scheme. So it can be about anything and everything, really. We have a number of communications. We actually refreshed and rebranded last year just to get the word out there about E&I again and get people interested. So we have a dedicated SharePoint page where you can register your project ideas, you can learn all about E&I, and you can also search a database of all of our previous projects and access all of the reports. We have a quarterly newsletter where we update people on what's going on with E&I. We talk about what's going on with the Innovation Network. Sometimes we might interview the chairs or participants of our groups just to give people a flavour of what it's like to get involved. So basically, we're just really trying to motivate people to want to get involved. And then we have our dedicated email address as well. I've talked too much, so I'm just going to leave you with a quote from a very famous and successful innovator, Steve Jobs, who I think here really captures the essence of the message that we're trying to get across with our program. And that is, innovation is the ability to see change as an opportunity and not a threat. So I'm hoping that if you take anything from my presentation today, that it's that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, guys, both of you, for your fantastic presentations. I think it's very interesting to have two completely different approaches to innovation in the public sector. One kind of following the Making Innovation Real strategy and kind of working on embedding that, and then the DSP, kind of its own individual way of kind of going about doing this. But yeah, I think there's kind of a lot of crossover as well, which is very, very interesting, and I'm sure has proved very useful for our panelists today. So I'm going to for our audience today, I'm going to throw out a question to both of you. Both of you briefly touched on difficulty in counting silos, working in silos. I think that's often, I suppose, an observation of working in public sector, that we've worked very like this, but kind of trying to afford collaboration can be quite difficult. And both of you have worked in well, I know from speaking to both of you ahead of this, Catherine, you worked in a number of areas in local government and Cork City Council as well, with yourself, Bridgett, and working first in the Guards, then working in DSP in a number of areas. What would you say to someone who wants to break down barriers and move away from insular ways of thinking, working, to collaborate more? And I know Cork City Council, again, in your response, there was quite a high basically a lot of people said the collaboration was quite high in Cork City Council. So if any of any insight on that.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, Catherine, by all means, if you'd like to fire away.
That's fine. It's a very good question in terms of silo mentality. And I think there's a cultural piece around this as well for any organisation. Once upon a time, we were known as Cork Corporation, you know, and if you ask a staff member where do you work, you know, you'd get, I work for Cork Corporation. But sometimes I think staff tend to identify with the section, not only the directorate or the department, but the section in which they work. I think what you have to do is align it back to the corporate plan. So I mentioned how we had done an exercise with staff as well in terms of the corporate planning process, that you feel part of the organisation and that you can identify what you're doing with corporate goals. We have 6 corporate goals in Cork City Council, and I mentioned our 6 corporate values as well. And if you can align what you're doing in the context of your day-to-day work, it can start to chip away at this idea that I just work for a particular section and department, whether that's in allocations in a housing directorate, or where you're actually in traffic management and operations, that you feel part of the larger cohort of workers who are delivering for the city or for the county, whichever local authority that you're in. So I think it's the cultural approach first. Then you can set up the mechanisms in terms of that cross collaboration that I was referring to in my presentation, and forums and examples that Bridgett was giving in terms of bringing in different chairs and bringing in different groups can be very beneficial to that. And the third example then about breaking down silo structures is if what the project you're doing under your annual service delivery plan, of which we have 5 under each corporate plan cycle, what stakeholders do you identify in terms of what you're doing? And that can involve multidisciplinary teams across functions in local authorities, which will break down the silos over time, because you realise the contributions that experts in different areas, whether it's an archaeologist, whether it's a planner or an engineer, can actually come in and enhance your project. And it's when there's ownership around those outcomes by staff that you suddenly will break down maybe the service delivery model where we think in sections and in strands to a more collaborative approach. And those would be some suggestions I have around that to break down the silo piece on. I hope that helps.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. Kind of slow, incremental cultural change, I suppose, and a very tiny, brief synopsis on that. Bridgett, do you have anything kind of add on what Catherine was saying there?
Yeah, I guess I would add that for us, our communication is key. So getting the message out there about our program in particular, and motivating people to want to get involved. So like in terms of silos, yeah, our organisation is very similar. We've kind of got people working out in intro offices, we've people working centrally, we've people working on call centres and that. So a lot of time people don't kind of talk to each other or know what each other's doing. So it's kind of been the challenge of the E&I unit to get our message out there, which is why we decided last year to refresh and rebrand and kind of come out with this much more motivational way of communicating with our staff to say, look, do you want to change things? Do you want your voice heard? So I think that kind of communication, and to really be sort of positive and show people the fruits of our labour, to say, look at our wellbeing unit, this came from an E&I project, look at this change that's happened, this came from an E&I project. And that's kind of the thing for us that motivates people at all grades then to say, hang on a minute, I could really get involved here and I could really make a difference. So yeah, I'd say communication is also a really necessary piece.
No, that's really interesting. I think keeping people in the loop, absolutely, just so you're aware, like you said, of what's going on. Because sometimes these organisations are so expansive, it can be so hard to keep up to date on what's going on. So I think you're absolutely right in keeping regular communication as well. Thanks for that, guys. One of the questions we have in for Bridgett, we have another question for you. Let me see. So what was it? It was, yeah, there's a question here about kind of fear of failure. You kind of spoke a little bit earlier, kind of building on your success and your failure. Public bodies, naturally and rightly so, kind of fall under a lot of scrutiny. What would you say to someone who's anxious about or risk averse, basically purely because of the fear of failure and the scrutiny that comes along with it?
I suppose with the nature of our work and our responsibility to the taxpayer, we are unfortunately always going to be under scrutiny. But the way that we are trying to think about things is that if you don't take risks, then things won't change. So you need to take a risk in order to be creative and to innovate. And I mean, you just have to be brave sometimes. I think the beauty of the group project is that you can work through the potential barriers at project stage. So things that you think might come under scrutiny, you can try your best to work through that and come up with either an answer for it before recommendations are made. But yeah, I'd say just to be brave and take the risk.
Totally fair. No, I absolutely agree. It can be very difficult just sometimes when you have that level of scrutiny, but you're right, sometimes an end goal. And I think it's also important to have a little bit of space to fall into failure, but to learn from it and to keep going and adjust your approach then later on. I totally agree. A question for Catherine regarding the experience of delivering change in Cork. How did people deal with resistance to change down there, with a focus on change that particularly affected employees and colleagues?
Thanks, Owen. Thanks, Aidan, for your question. It's actually linked to the conversation there as well around the fear of failure. Resistance to change is a very human feeling that we all have. You know, there are two types of change in life, the ones that we seek out and the ones that happen to us, and the latter can often be the harder one to adjust to. I think it's empathizing with staff in the first instance around that resistance piece, because it is coming from fear. And it's very much around delving into what the issues are. So if it's a particular change program, if it's project specific, it's onboarding people to feel ownership around what you're seeking to do. And having worked in different projects and different directorates over the years, you know, it's about staff getting almost that reassurance piece and being heard in terms of what are the issues, are the worries here. It can often be overcome through one-to-one sessions. But then in terms of, you know, your champions for change, and your champions for change can be at any level in an organization. It's not actually grade specific, which is something that came back from our consultation with the forum as well. You can get some fantastic ideas from frontline staff and can-do attitudes. And it's about getting the influencers into the room, you know, the people that can influence others in terms of overcoming this fear piece. I think when you focus on what the outcomes are, and, you know, there is that phrase, what's in it for me? You know, you're coming in to do things in a certain way, you're comfortable, you know, it delivers. You know, why would I do this or why would I go for this? And it's back to that whole piece about where you fit into the context of the organization. If you are streamlining a service, you're making something more accessible to the public, you're cutting down duplication in the process. And you'll find over time that you start to break down those barriers and those resistances. Now, look, we're all human. There might be an element of, you mentioned a slow incremental piece there a while ago, interesting. It depends on what it is, but that cultural shift can take place at different paces. And it's trying to continually work on that with the people concerned. I think that's the key thing I want to say really around, you know, when you're putting together a project team as well, be careful that, you know, you are selecting the key influences in an area that can encourage others on board. But I think it's that listening skill is really important. You may have those then that will still resist, but they end up seeing it over time and the benefits it brings, and eventually they can be onboarded as well. So I hope even that gives you some insights into that really good question, you know, because it's something we all deal with.
Absolutely. No, I think like from previous kind of events we've had when it comes to change management, a lot of time is not to discount kind of the experience gathered by people who've been in the organization pre your transformational plan or whatever it is, basically to keep to. They got the organization to where it is today. It's not to forgo all of their input and their experience, but to kind of bring it along with you and to basically build on it, not build from it. So there's kind of a distinction between the two. So thank you very much for that, Catherine. And I'll ask you guys one more question each. Then, Bridgett, we have a question for you. So the E&I Forum kind of undoubtedly shows that the DSP is kind of ahead of the curve, was certainly when they got around to establishing this, and they continue to foster innovation in your own way. So the E&I team, as you showed there, has kind of a very formal structure from the top down, which is great. And as you said, you touched on earlier, basically saying that was kind of part of how it's perceived as being such a central part of the organization's strategy. Do you think that this structure is key to the success of innovation in DSP?
I think the structure works really well for us because we are such a large organisation. We have around about 6,500 staff. So I think it's necessary for us to have such a formal structure. But I think it's a structure that can be applied in a different way to other organisations. I think there's no reason why other organisations can't have smaller innovative groups, project groups that are formed maybe without so many oversight groups involved. Our oversight groups are broken down into 5 different areas. Maybe other organizations that are smaller don't necessarily need that kind of breakdown. I think one thing that's absolutely essential is our management buy-in. I think that really drives everything. It allows to make resources available. It really drives the program, making sure that implementation happens. It kind of, it really underpins the whole program. So I'd say if anybody was adopting sort of a similar, maybe scaled down approach, I'd say management buy-in is definitely key.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's so basically top down support, but kind of bottom up approach, I suppose, in 2 ways. That's really good. Thank you very much for that. And finally, Catherine, today you discussed basically how Cork City Council has developed its Making Innovation Real strategy. It's definitely been it's certainly a journey to get to the point that you are today. What would you say to a public sector body that's only starting out or considering creating their own strategy?
Yeah, it's a good question. Take a look at your corporate planning process first, in terms of what stage it's at, what your timelines around the corporate plan is. In local authorities, we do those in 5-year cycles, as I mentioned. And, there would have been, when any organisation does corporate planning, consultation, staff sessions, and see the kind of things that are coming back, what's kind of close to the hearts of the staff. What we found when we were looking at this is that there is an appetite for innovation, but where do you bring your idea? And this year we've started up a local innovation fund. It's small, but it's a start. And again, that senior management team backing Bridgett that you mentioned there, I'd completely echo how important that is in terms of that leadership, innovative leadership piece. To show that it's valued in an organisation. So I would start from there, and then I would look at the forums for discussion. I think that forum, in terms of bringing people in, how we established the membership of the forum was those that were coming to us with ideas for Public Service Innovation Fund applications, but also who engaged with us during Innovation Week to do some fantastic presentations on different initiatives that are happening across the local authority. And we also got our PSIF fund applicants who were successful to present on the cargo bikes and about the remotely operated vehicle in the fire station. The one this year we get an update from our head of IT in due course, and that kind of gets staff thinking and working. And I mentioned Champions for Change. You'll find those amongst the organisation and involve them into this network. I know, Bridgett, you were mentioning networks there and chairs in different groups. It depends on the size of the organisation that you have. Bring them together to do this discussion piece, do the interactive sessions, and don't be alone. The surveys and the tools that you've developed centrally as well, I would recommend use of those because they give you very valuable feedback. The senior management teams, then respective corporate leaders should be on board with it too. And I think then it's, you can write a great strategy document. It doesn't have to be rocket science. If you're looking at a strategy like this, you're not doing a huge document. It's a few pages to encourage an approach to make a corporate value part of corporate thinking, that it means something in the day-to-day. It's not just something that looks lovely in a document. So it has to be something that's live and continually used. And I think the development of the microsites and the discussions, and I like the part, Bridgett, where you say you interview the chairs to get their feedback. We had a member of our senior management team present at the last forum as well, and it just increases and encourages that connection. So I hope that's some pointers around it, in terms of we wouldn't it up soon. And thanks for the opportunity to tell you about it today.
That's fantastic, because I think that those are some of the questions that we get kind of coming in from organisations who haven't yet kind of established their own strategy. How do we get started? So I think obviously having someone like yourself speak from experience as to how to start from the bottom and work your way up is very, very valuable. So thank you very much for that. So guys, we've reached 1 o'clock. I just want to thank both our presenters today, Bridgett and Catherine, for their time. 2 completely different approaches to embedding innovation, but equally as valuable and yield great insights for our audience today. We hope each of you can take away something to work on embedding innovation in your own organisation. And as I said earlier, this may be a space that we create, but it is your forum. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us at innovation@per.gov.ie to discuss potentially hosting your own session, to discuss your own innovation idea or initiative in your own organisation. So thank you very much for joining us today, guys. Thanks for our presenters again, and all the best. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye now.